at least in some cases, sincerely, not just where religion is being used as a cover for something else. But, we look at the history of Christianity, we see the same thing.
Sure.
Now, it's been, the numbers are not anywhere on the scale of what fascism or Nazism or communism produced just in terms of the death toll, but
or capitalism, let's not forget,
or liberal secularism.
Liberal secularism.
I mean, if we look at the abortion Holocaust, right?
I mean, there's 1 million dead Iraqis.
Yeah, true enough.
Yeah.
So we have to, I think, face up to that reality as well, but not, I think, by rejecting anything about religion itself,
right.
but rather by drawing on the resources, and here, of course, you've done it brilliantly as well as courageously, the resources within our own traditions for the critique
right.
of the forces within our traditions that have resorted unjustifiably
right.
to violence. I don't see any alternative to that. It seems to me wherever evil is being done
right.
in the name of faith, people from that faith have got to draw on the resources of that faith
right.
for the critique of the wrongdoing. Otherwise, it's just going to be constant war.
Well, I think one of the great crises and calamities of the current situation is that the faiths are enlisted in political conflicts. Like right now, the Iranian-Arab crises. I mean, it's not about Sunni-Shia conflicts. This is about Persian-Arab politics, and yet religion is always enlisted.
It's a kind of overlay.
I consider it's impressed.
Yeah.
It's forced into. It's not enlisted. It's impressed, and so that's a real problem. But I think that if we look at the major crises in Islam right now, it's a crisis of authority, and the Catholics have an advantage because they have the magisterium, and so the Pope and the See of Cardinal, they can determine what policy, if for want of a better word,
right.
what doctrine
You're not
is.
relying on charismatic authority.
Exactly. And that helps to a great deal. The Muslims are like the rabbinical tradition. We have a scholastic tradition which traditionally was based on what was called isnad, or chains of transmission. So one of the things they always ask Jesus, who were your teachers? Because they want to know what the rabbinical chain is. Are you from Hilal? Are you from Shamayel? Who's your teacher? So we can know what school you're following. And just like in the Jewish tradition, you have certain acceptable parameters. Outside of that, you have things that are considered heterodoxic or outside. I mean, I don't know if the Jewish tradition would use that word because they tend to be more of a praxis than a doctrines, but they certainly would have heteropraxic normative standards within their tradition. But Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a rabbinical student. That would not happen in Catholicism, because you could not have somebody. That could happen in Protestant tradition. So you could have evangelicals that decide to kill an abortion doctor because they actually believe that this is a mass murder and I'm ridding the world of some evil. And that certainly happens here. And like John Brown, the law of God is above the laws of men.
So he murders slave owners.
Exactly. And Nat Turner, who was a profoundly religious African-American slave, who was a preacher. He was trained in an evangelical tradition. So that aspect within the Islamic tradition is very problematic. Now, the only people that have a type of magisterium right now are the Turks and the Iranians, the Shia tradition. So the Turks have a very a standardized tradition, so that all of their scholars go to the same schools and learn the same books. The Iranians have the same situation. The Sunnis, it's anarchy right now. And this is a great problem for us because there's so many, normative tradition has really broken down. And so I represent, in essence, to help people that are from other faiths, I represent a more Catholic tradition. And a lot of people say, oh, Islam needs a reformation. My response is, this is the Reformation. You guys don't know your history, because the Reformation was one of the bloodiest periods in European history. In fact, there's an argument, I think it's a fallacious one, that the secular state emerged as an arbiter between the great Catholic-Protestant conflicts. But Kavanaugh, I think, really destroys that argument in his book, The Myth of Religious Violence. So this is where we stand now. I'll just to finish. My argument, and this is something that I end up being attacked from traditionalists as well, because I do consider myself a traditionalist or a neo-traditionalist, whatever you want to call me. Ossified tradition is not tradition. When tradition becomes sterile, which is what happened, as you know, in the Catholic tradition, which created the Protestant Reformation, when tradition becomes sterile, you get protest responses to that. The traditionalists in the Sunni world have not come to terms with the real critiques that these fundamentalists have made about ossified tradition. And so they're not taking ownership that they have a responsibility to why these Protestant responses to tradition have emerged. And that, for me, is something that irks me, the fact that they have not taken it. We haven't had a Council of Trent. And that's what I would argue, that the Sunni scholastic tradition really needs to have a real reformation, a counter-reformation. And I would argue, and I like this distinction that I got from a Catholic writer, that tradition is the living faith of the dead, but traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And I think what we have today is the dead faith of the living.
Well, if you'll excuse me for saying, as an outsider, what it looks like to me is what people